Darby, hello. We're in the study and it's February 2024. So we're looking at a MacBook Pro, and I wouldn't say it's fame and definitely not fortune, which is spreading, but I've been contacted by a charity to look at this Apple computer to maybe resell it on. So we're going to have a little look. Um, so I can see a scratch here, and there's no power adapter. And there's no cable. What do we have? We have the Mr. MacBook Pro, and it says it's an A1708. So there's an A1708. I'll have to look that up. But the point of the story is that apparently it's water damaged. So I've invested previously in the Pentalobe screwdriver. And so what I plan to do first is not power it on with my power adapter, which I do have. But I am going to just take it apart and see if there's any obvious water damage. Obviously, if someone tells you the device is water damaged, you do not hope for the best and power it on. I would say that I've tried to mention the fact to the guy that gave me this, who's I think a Unix guy of old, that in the Apple world things are protected. So it's not just like you could, even if we do repair it from a hardware perspective, it may still be a complete chocolate fireguard or dead weight, because if we don't know the Apple ID and password to this machine, we won't be able to log into it. And even if we know the Apple ID and password, then if that Apple ID and password is associated with a telephone number, then when you log in to the machine with that Apple ID and password, it's still going to send a numeric check code to the phone number. So there's multiple reasons why this could be a completely useless dead paperweight, even if we manage to fix the water damage. Okay, we shall continue. So I'm actually so annoyed that I've started to write a little article about it, which I should be publishing. So here is the second phone, the second item I've been given in 1 week. In fact, I was given a job lot of 8 phones to look at and try and recycle by some generous lady. And one of the slightly better items, believe it or not, was this kind of ancient, I think it's 2016, 2017 Samsung phone. Which brings me on to a Samsung's firmware reset protection. So this phone was currently locked, and I couldn't get into it because it's got a password and so forth. And this lady had a job lot of phones, and she didn't know any of the unlock information. So I thought, oh, no problem, I can get past all of that. As a systems guy, I've always thought, oh, that's going to be easy. Turns out, not so easy. And in many ways, Samsung reflects Apple's tendencies, but in the Android and Windows world. And sure enough, they have something called FRP, Firmware Reset Protection. So initially, I thought I would install an alternate operating system onto this phone. So connect your Android phone to a Windows computer. And then there's a set of instructions which I was trying to diligently follow to install Lineage, which is like an open source Android version for this phone, and I could get a much more up-to-date version of Android on this phone, and I'd be wiping it at the same time. So I thought. It's actually quite a detailed set of instructions, and I've got a link in the article, Factory Reset. You need to install something called, normally in the Android world, you use a set of utilities which includes the ADB for the Android debugger. But of course, Samsung has everything has got to be done differently. I mean, it's like I say, they parallel Apple in the annoyance factor to me. So the recommended way I was told was to use Heimdall and Zadig. Never heard of them, but I have heard of them now. And these two tools allow you to speak to the Android phone at a very low level. So you boot the phone, the Android phone, the Samsung phone with its bootloader, and you talk to that bootloader, And I thought this was going to be easy, and I ran the command to print out the partitions of the phone. It did all that fine, so I know I'm communicating with the phone. And then I tried to download TWRP, which is the sort of base level program which allows you to, it's not the operating system, but it provides a set of utilities which allow you to back up the operating system and reinstall the operating system, etc. Except, I don't think you can see it. You probably can't see it because the resolution of my photograph is crapola. But I tried to do that and it says, oh, I can't do that because I've got FRP still valid. So you can't flash the firmware. So I thought, oh, I know I can get past this. I thought, a lot of Googling later and some YouTube views, there's another tool for Samsung phones only, which is called Odin. It's got various different versions. And at this point, you're starting to dive into what I call a murky world, because you need to get things like this tool and you need to get firmware. And as soon as you start to Google these things, you go to sites whereby the site itself could contain malicious viruses embedded on the site to try and download onto your system. So I was doing all this on a completely separate PC. I actually had to, believe it or not, I built a separate laptop with a fresh install of Windows just for this operation, just in case. And it wasn't without worry, because the sites you go into are clearly dodgy sites, as I would call them. And so in other words, just to get the firmware, the original firmware. So Odin is a tool which allows you to install original Samsung firmware. And so you try and download the firmware and you find out that you would be able to download it. You have to log in and give you information, and so I create a new Gmail ID, use that Gmail ID to log in with, so it's just a one-off effectively. In case they're tracking your Gmail ID, you find the firmware that you want to download isn't available, but if you pay for a plan, you can download that firmware, etc., etc., etc. So eventually, long story short, get the firmware, load up the firmware, you have to unzip the firmware, put it into the various different components, and it does install that firmware. So I was extremely happy. I thought, I cracked it. And then you get to the fact that you start the phone up, it says start, you have to change the language into English, you have to agree to all the terms and conditions. It says it needs to contact the Wi-Fi. At this point I was getting a bit suspicious. And then it says, oh, wait a minute, this device was reset to continue. So there's some very low level component of the bootloader, which is presumably has the last used Gmail Play Store identification and won't let you continue unless you authenticate. So I authenticated with my synthetically just created Gmail user ID and password. It said, aha, that's not the right one. And I could see from another screen that it's actually Google has logged into that Gmail user ID and password. So what I'm saying is this phone, which is it's an 8-year-old phone, basically junk. I mean, it wasn't very powerful in the first place, but could usefully be recycled. It's junk, unless somehow we can go back to the original owner and find out their Gmail user ID and password. Unlikely they want to give us that over the phone, is it? So where are we? We're at two companies, Apple and Samsung, who are both, on the face of it, doing you a favour by keeping your data safe. I'm sure that's how it's advertised, if at all. But in practice, not quite so simple. So what Samsung and Apple are both doing is guaranteeing that they are reducing the supply of useful phones. Now, I don't have a particular problem with Samsung or Apple saying, if it's less than 5 years old, here is a procedure for unlocking a locked phone. And indeed, if we scroll up into my article that I'm writing, which is along the line of what I'm saying, Apple apparently have got this way whereby you can remove the activation lock from an Apple device by signing onto the web. So the original user can do this. So your device suddenly dies. You can, and you pass that on to a third party. But before you do that, you ought to go, and no one does this, you ought to go to iCloud.com, remove it from iCloud, and remove it from the account. And at that point, the activation lock is removed. So when, in future, this laptop arrives in the hand of me, and I'm trying to, let's suppose I resuscitated it, and then I try to log into that laptop, it says, okay, you're a new user. Fine, go ahead. But at the moment, even if we restore that laptop, resuscitate that laptop, which we haven't done, but even if we would spend, £100 or £200 or whatever it costs to resuscitate that laptop, then we're faced with the fact that it's still dead as a dodo brick, because we can't get past the activation lock. And just to show you that no one really knows about the activation lock, which is a key thing, here's a picture from my favourite auction site. And this week we've got an iMac Mini. So it's not an iMac, a Mac Mini, spelt wrong. We've got an iMac 2014, and we've got multiple. Last week we had about 20 of these. This week we've got 2 left, I suppose. iMac 21.5 2012. I know this is a 1418. Go into this. It looks like you can install this, doesn't it? Looks great. There's the installation screen. You're a buyer, you think, oh, I can install High Sierra on this. Fantastic. Wrong. Because you can get past this point and then it's going to say, oh, do you know what? This machine belongs to somebody else. So nowhere on any of these adverts does it say whether it's activation locked or not. Nowhere. If you go onto eBay and try to buy any Apple stuff, does it say it's activation locked? I think it doesn't. So on the face of it, manufacturers are trying to do you a favour by saying your machine gets stolen, it can't be utilised, but it turns out it can't be reset. So what manufacturers could say is that after a certain number of years, that device could be reset, and there should be a procedure where you type in the serial number and it's reset, which is automatically after a number of years based on the sale date. But that's not the case. So these devices are locked out in perpetuity, and it means to say that the supply of actual machines is reduced, and you can just go to that manufacturer and buy a new machine. So I believe this is it's an unfair way to proceed. Manufacturers are artificially restricting the supply of their machines so that you are forced to buy a new machine. And there my lesson and sermon shall end. Good night.